ask you how you first became involved in research and why you became interested in researching British Muslims.
In terms of being involved in research or interested in research, if I look back at my childhood, I was sort of interested in the likes of Newton and Curie, Marie Curie, and various other individual scientists who discovered things. So I've always had an interest to discover things, which sort of led me into the natural sciences. So I studied in chemistry, for example, and once I finished my chemistry degree, I was working for a length of time as a research scientist. So I had an interest in research from a young age, the concept of discovering, the concept of finding and looking for things which weren't known to man before. And then I started to sort of get involved, being Muslim myself, I started to get involved in researching Muslims in general, not sort of in academic methodologies whatsoever, but just as an interest, as a hobby more than anything else. And this then has more recently sort of led me on to doing my sort of doctoral research now, where I'm studying Muslims as minorities in Britain and looking at particularly through the sort of Hanafi law texts.
All right, okay. What research are you working on currently?
As I just sort of alluded to with the last question, what I'm looking at the moment is researching Muslims living as minorities, because what we find is over the last 50 to 60, 70 years or so, Muslims have tended to move from majority states and become initially as economic migrants, now living within what are termed Western countries, be it the Europe or the Americas. And they've now got what could sometimes sort of viewed as a conflict of interest as such, where they've got their religion as such as an identity, and they've also got their citizenship to a secular democratic country as well. And it's how Islam allows the flexibility, as how the Hanafi law interprets it, for the Muslim to live within that atmosphere, so that he's not in any way or shape or form feeling that he's inadequate in terms of his identity as a Muslim, but neither does it affect his identity as a citizen of a secular state.
Okay, and what has this research found so far?
Well, it's been interesting, because what I found initially, just sort of looking on it as a social aspect, Muslims have tended to take a number of positions to the state or to the wider non-Muslim majority. So you find some Muslims who take a sort of an isolationist approach, where they kind of disconnect completely from the wider non-Muslim majority and sort of isolated or become or choose to be isolated, depending on which view you agree or disagree with. And likewise, I've seen sort of Muslims assimilating completely within the wider non-Muslim majority, so arguably there's no difference between a Muslim and non-Muslim. And then there's another step which is termed as the integration step, whereby the balance is there both in terms of the religious identity and also the sort of citizenship identity. So that's the sort of social aspect of it. Legally, what I'm finding is that there are dispensations, there are methodologies and ways available within the traditional law schools to allow Muslims to live as minorities, to offer them that sort of minority status, whereby they can feel quite at ease expressing their own religiousness or their identity as a Muslim, but in no way affecting their identity as a citizen of a sort of secular democratic state. So it's good to see, because what we tend to find over time, or what you read, is that's not possible, or that can't exist. There's this sort of clash of the civilizations, or this confrontation which supposedly exists. However, that's a very rudimentary or a simplistic way of looking at things, and the Islamic texts that exist to this day over the last 1400 or so years show that flexibility has always been there, but it's a case of having the expertise of the text and exploring what's available.
Okay, which methods did you use for this research?
What I'm mainly interested in, because of my background in sort of Islamic law, is to see whether Islamic law facilitates this flexibility, whether it allows this flexibility, and whether it's legally sanctioned. And what I'm using is sort of time-tested methodologies and procedures which scholars have been using, religious scholars, Islamic scholars have been using since sort of the dawn of Islam. However, it's being done within sort of the Western academic circle, so it's also applying the techniques and skills and that exist within a university setting. So you're looking at critiquing things and making sure things are as how they should be according to sort of Western academic principles. So with those methodologies that already existed, that's a kind of a myriad of the two concepts or the procedures, and what you're trying to get is unearth this flexibility, as I've mentioned, which exists within the school. And then I'm particularly looking at sort of case studies where certain examples where Muslims may come up in certain situations whereby they may feel that to practice their faith is slightly more difficult or it's more awkward, and they're looking at whether that flexibility exists within the law to permit them to do certain things. So it's kind of using things which exist within the law school as well, and also the sort of Western academic principles that exist.
Right, okay, thank you.